In this next lesson, we'd like to talk about switches. Switches are a way of your robot's program making a decision during the flow, and depending on what it's decided, go one way or the other. That probably didn't make a lot of sense, so let's put it in context of what we've already done. We've already seen loops, so I'm going to loop forever. And I'm going to wait for a touch sensor. And when that touch sensor is pressed, I want to make a sound. We haven't really talked so much about this sound block, but it's a way of annoying people to no end. You can either select the tone selection and then play a different note, or you can select the sound files, which will let you play back a lot of pre-programmed speech out of the speaker of your robot. Anyway, so what we have right now is a program. I'm going to change this back to tone. Is a program that waits for a touch sensor. When it's pressed, it'll play the note A, and then it'll go around and around and around. That's all well and good, but what do you do if you wanted to do something else? Remember that your program came to a grinding halt here during the waiting for that button to be pressed. What if I had a second touch sensor, and if that one's pressed, I want to play some other sound? Well, you can't really do that with a wait. So let's get rid of the wait. I've got it selected. I'm going to hit the delete key to get rid of it. And now let's go and add a switch instead. Now the switch comes in a lot of different flavors. We happen to have a touch sensor switch right now, but you could have a light sensor switch or ultrasonic switch or one that watches the buttons on the front of the NXT brick, and just all kinds of good stuff. So anyway, we'll leave it with a touch sensor. If the sensor's pressed, it's going to take this top path, and if it's not pressed, it's going to take the bottom path. Well, that means I could just take my sound block here and move it up to the top. So now it's going to spin around in this loop, and if it's pressed, it's going to take the top path and play that note, and if it's not pressed, it's not going to do anything, and then it'll spin around and around and around it'll go. Well, great. Now that we have that, we can do other things. So maybe I'll take another switch here. In this case, I'm going to do a touch sensor switch still, but we're going to assume it's on port 2, and we'll play another sound when that happens. In this case, I'm going to have it say good job. Okay, so now I've got this program that's checking two things. It's checking for the touch sensor on port 1. It's checking for a port 2 touch sensor, and if one's pressed, it's going to play that note. The other one's pressed, it's going to say good job. Now this is kind of a simplistic example, but you can imagine this being a very powerful thing. Like suppose I wanted to watch both touch sensors and light sensors on my robot, and if the touch sensor is pressed, maybe I wanted to move away from a wall, and if the light sensor sees a black line, maybe I want to stop and do something else. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this. Oh, one of the things that we didn't talk about is what bumped means. Here I'm on this touch sensor switch. Bumped means that the switch was pressed and released. Now, that might be pretty important because your program might be down in this section somewhere playing this sound, for example, and it bumps into something or somebody presses the other button. If you don't use bumped, then it may not catch it because maybe you pressed and released the button while this thing was saying good job. It came around over here and said, well, the button's not pressed here, and continue. If you use bumped, then any time between the last time it checked and now that the button was pressed and released, it'll remember that fact and play the top one. So it just kind of depends on how you're going to use it as to whether you want to say pressed or you'd want to say bumped.